First, I would like to say how delighted I am to be here today. Each church that I come into has a different order of service and a different procedure, so maybe I'll be a little more at ease when I come next time. I hope you invite me back, that is. But it is a pleasure to be here. I am from Knox Guelph. I'm on the session of Knox Guelph. I'm a layperson, and I'm the only layperson at this point in the history of the church that has been moderator of the General Assembly. So you know the kind of responsibility that I had, your own minister having served in this post a couple of years after me. So, but it was really a pleasure to be here with you today. Let us pray together. Creator and maker of all, bless the words of my lips and the meditations of our hearts. Grow in us and show us your ways and inspire us to live by your truth. Amen. Once upon a time, far away and long ago, there was a salesperson traveling down a long rural road. Feeling lost, he spotted a little girl about 12 years old by the roadside, and he asked her, "How far is it to the Robinson farm?" "Well," said the bright young lady, "if you keep going the way you're headed, it's 24,996 miles. But if you turn around, it's about 4. Once upon a time, long ago and far away, that's what it sounds today when we read from the passage in Leviticus. At that time, people made a direct connection between a physical ailment and a sin. If a person was afflicted with an ailment, in this case it was leprosy, it was presumed to be punishment for some sin the person or parents had committed. So sickness, especially a sickness like leprosy, carried with it a double whammy. Not only were you and all that you touched presumed to be physically contagious, all those to be avoided by all, but also you were seen to be morally or spiritually inferior, as being cursed, and therefore to be dealt with cautiously indeed. The community, after all, needs protection, not just from the possibility of physical contagion, but from moral corruption as well. So it was. Once upon a time, far away and long ago, those with leprosy or any skin disease that might turn out to be leprosy were expelled from the community. We read in Leviticus today that lepers had to dwell apart, that they were to live outside the camp of the people, to live where they were not allowed to touch, to hug, to embrace those they know and love. To live in such a way that anything that they touch or carry or work on can only be shared by others also with leprosy. To be utterly dependent upon charity, provided at a safe distance of others. I was a missionary in Taiwan for 6 years, and in fact, you'll be interested to know that Sidney Jiang's father was my pastor just prior to his death. So I know that family very well, and I know his love for you as a congregation. But in Taiwan, when I was there, the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan had a lovely spot on the mountainside, and it was called Happy Mount, where lepers were taken to live out the rest of their lives. I visited that colony on a few occasions, and over the years saw many changes in attitude towards this dreaded disease. The residents were craving for attention and wanted to be touched. I can recall an old woman coming up to me and holding out her hand. Her fingers, some of her fingers were gone. Her nose was partially gone. Her ear was partially gone. And I can remember her holding out her hand to me and wanting me to hold it. I'll never forget the smile on her face when I took her hand and put it between my two hands and held her. But imagine having to announce their presence to others, their danger to others, by crying out when they went into any community, "Unclean, unclean." Can you just imagine how defacing that would be? When lepers or those suspected of leprosy recovered from their disease, they had to go through an elaborate rite of purification so that they could again join their community. And in rejoining the community, recover their identity, their sense of being one of God's people, their sense of being loved and of being worthy to be loved. One commentator in the Bible has suggested that maybe one reason Jesus responded to the leper's cry in today's gospel story is because he identified with the man's condition. Jesus too would be an outcast from his family and people. He will, in effect, be declared unclean and cast out the city to be executed. You know, and I often think of that. If I had touched that woman during the Bible times, I would have been considered unclean. I think of that little boy that I was with a couple of weeks ago that had chicken pox, and thinking to myself, oh dear, I hope I don't take it to anyone. I have had chicken pox, and that's what his mother's concern was. And she happens to be an emergency relief medical person, so she assured me I was safe. But imagine having to say, you know, to come and visit our little boy, you must have had chicken pox. It was almost like he was unclean, and that really hurt my heart. When Jesus, at the end of his ministry, is examined by the priests, he was found to be unacceptable, to be not a true member of the people, to be not worthy of either God's love or the community's. Just as the lepers dressed like corpses in their treatments, ritually dying and being reborn, so Christ will die and be wrapped in a shroud, and after a time be reborn to a new life with a new community of believers gathered around him. A community which not only accepts him and loves him, but is loved and accepted by him. In the gospel reading today, Jesus cured the leper with the word and a touch. He touched him. In other miracles that we read about in the gospel, we see that a word is often sufficient for a cure. And surely it was here as well. But in this story concerning the leper, Jesus does the unthinkable. He touched the leper. He bridges the gap between what is clean and what is unclean, making himself in many eyes unclean along with the leper. By his touch, Jesus makes himself one with the leper. Indeed, his touch identifies him with all lepers and with all who are unclean. He is one with them. In effect, because of his touch, he bears their sin. He bears their contagion. He claims their uncleanliness as his own. Yet, as we know, with the word and the touch, rather than Jesus becoming unclean, the leper became clean. But before saying any more about that, I want you to think about how, at the time of Jesus and at the time of Moses, a superficial blemish or rash might end up with you being judged a leper, at least until it cleared up. must have been frightening for people to have had something, just even something as minute as a mosquito bite, and to be considered unclean until it was cleaned up. Your life could be destroyed for a period of weeks, if not months or years, on the basis of what people think that they see, on the basis that you may have a particular kind of disease. When I came home from overseas, I worked with the Board of Congregational Life, which was the umbrella that serviced all of the congregations and all their work in their Christian education, justice ministries, etc. And the General Secretary of the Life and Mission Agency came in to me one day and he said, I need your help because I know that you know a little bit about leprosy. He said, I've just received a call from a minister in Saskatchewan who is very alarmed because there is a new member in his congregation that has just declared that he had had leprosy. And the congregation are now not wanting him to be there because they consider him unclean. So he asked me what my advice would be to this minister. So I assured him that leprosy is not something you can get as easily as chickenpox. You have to have contact over a long period of time, like about 2 years. And this is why family members often get it. But you just do not get it by passing someone on the street. So he said, that makes me feel better. And I said, besides that, that man has probably been cured. He's probably had treatment. There's now medication. I know at Mackay Hospital in Taipei, they go in and they have these big vats of warm wax that they can put their hands into and massage their hands. So he went back to the minister to tell the minister not to worry and to assure his congregation that this man should be welcomed to worship with them. So it made me wonder if our society is all that different from that of ancient Israel. Is this really only a story from far away and long ago? Or is it a story from today as well? A story about who is touchable, who is untouchable. The story about who is part of the community of the accepted and who is not. There's a story about a young man that came into a congregation. You can imagine him coming into Tweedsmuir, walking down this aisle. He was in ragged clothes. He was dirty, smelly. His hair was all tattered, all knotted from not being washed. This young man would walk down, and he sat, and of course everyone immediately thought, he's not one of us. He should not be permitted to be here. So he came in the story, he came in and he sat down on the floor. He came in to worship. And they thought, now what do we do? We've got this unclean man in our congregation. One of the old elders from the back of the church came up. He came down the aisle very slowly. And he came up to this man, and they thought, oh, thank goodness someone's going to take him out. But instead of that, this man came and sat on the floor beside him and sat there throughout the worship service. What would you do? How welcoming would you be here if a young man walked down this aisle and sat on the floor? Would an elder or a worshiper come and join the young man and make him feel welcome? This is a bit of a story about how we judge others, how we treat others. Do we judge on the basis of appearance, both real and supposed? In our society, to paraphrase Vincent Lombardi, looks aren't everything. They are only they are the only thing. Let's use Susan Boyle as an example. Everyone knows about Susan Boyle, who was on the program, Britain Has Talent. How this woman got up, she was kind of chubby, and her hair was, well, her hair had been done, it was clean, she had bushy eyebrows, and she got up and she just sort of shook herself, and when they asked her why she was there, and she said that she wanted to be a singer, and you could see all of the audience sort of snickering and laughing, and the judges snickering and laughing. And then she opened her mouth to sing, and that beautiful voice came out. You could see the look of astonishment coming in from the eyes, and you could see their eyes open up. There was one young girl in the audience who you could just see her going, and so do we judge a book by its cover? Do we judge every Susan Boyle by the way she looked? Now when you see Susan Boyle, you can realize that someone has been in there and tried to change her image, which I think is kind of sad. Perhaps none of us are considered to be the ideal type. We all lack something. Something perhaps we can purchase. Something we can do something about. But there are other things, perhaps more serious judgments that we make. Judgments that can cause people to become outcasts and suffer from that, even if the judgment later proves to be false. Who can live down an accusation of child abuse? Who can really live a normal life in the community if he or she has been known to be HIV positive? When I think of some of our pastors where someone gets a little disgruntled and makes accusations about child abuse and how it affects our ministers, it'll affect them for the rest of their lives, even though it is not true. Who can really walk about as one of us in this age of the war against terrorism if they come from the wrong ethnic group, if they wear the wrong clothing, or have the wrong skin color? What is right and what is wrong? Those are two words we should never use. Jesus' love exhibited in today's miracle offers us something different from the usual way we are treated and judged. We are accepted not because our skin is perfect or our spirits unblemished, but because he has entered our condition and he knows our needs and our weaknesses. We are accepted because he knows us as God's children, as his brothers and sisters. No matter what facade, what exterior is present. No matter what sin, what fear, what interior blemish has come to exist. As he reaches out to touch us, to make us whole, to restore us to the relationships that we should have, the relationship we should have with God and with ourselves, and with our community, and with our neighbors. That is what Jesus is all about. That is what our communion service celebrates. Here he touches us. Here he makes us clean. Here he restores us to one another. I notice these days how many more people hug when greeting one another. It's far from universal, but it's much more than I remember than when I was young. Men used to just shake hands. Now we give each other a hug, men and women, and that's wonderful. My mother's in a nursing home in Guelph, and I often think as I walk down the hall to her room, and you see the they're mainly older women. There are a couple of older men in the hallways, some of them putting their hands out and their hands are shaking, wanting you just to take their hands and to hold them. My aunt was in one day, and one lady said, "Will you just give me a hug?" She didn't know the lady. The lady was probably had some dementia. My aunt gave her a hug, and she never forgot my aunt again when she came in, because this was a person that showed her love and care. How many people would we pass by in that nursing home? Even when I go in to see my mother can hardly wait just to hold my hand or to have someone hold her hand. How often they need to be touched. I have an aunt in New Brunswick that worked in a nursing home, and she said how she always was so sad, so sorrowed because people were wanting just to be touched. There was one little old lady, she said, that no one ever came to visit her, and she was dying. My aunt said she climbed up in bed beside her and hugged her as she was dying. How many people would do that? This was a PSW who really cared. But there are lots of people who never get touched, let alone hugged. Older people say they don't get touched as much as they used to be by friends and family members. Are we put off by touching hands that are twisted with arthritis, blemished by bulging veins, or overly dry and wrinkled? People with AIDS also comment that they don't get touched much as they used to before they became HIV positive. By touching, it is not contagious. Many have taken to calling themselves as the new lepers, those that others regard as unclean, those that everyone wants to cast out of the community, lest somehow the community becomes physically and heavens morally contaminated. There are people we avoid touching in other ways. Church workers and volunteers tend to stay clear of teenagers. It's hard to get people to work with them. Their awkward stage of development makes a lot of us uncomfortable. Their music, their dress, their attitude, and thoughts are viewed as alien. The other day I was watching something on TV, and young Justin Bieber was on, and his pants were hanging down, and they were making these comments about, but you know, he'll get over it. And I think this is what we have to realize with our young people. They'll get over it, and we'll get over it too. Jesus reaches out to us today as he stretched out his hand to the leper and touched him and made him whole. So he stretches out his hands to us, and he stretched out his hands on the cross to make us whole. He took upon himself the sin and moral impurity that we have. He became unclean in the eyes of the law, that we might be made unclean. He allowed himself to be rejected, so that those who are rejected might be accepted. The point is, we are forgiven, every last one of us. God's love is there, waiting for us at all times in our life. His arms are reaching out to us. He wills, he chooses to make us clean. We don't have to persuade God to forgive us. His forgiveness is offered freely. All we have to do is call out to him. All we need to do is kneel at his feet and ask him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean, as the leper did. Jesus reaches out to us. He bids us to come to him. He chooses to touch us and to make us part of his family, his community, his church. And he calls us to touch others with love, to touch them and bring them into communion with him and with all who call upon his name. To God be the glory. Amen.